If you have ADHD, you might be lying in bed right now trying to get the sleep, but instead you're watching this video. And this is a very common trap that we fall into called bedtime procrastination. So in this video, I'm going to show you why neglecting your sleep and procrastinating on sleep is the biggest mistake that you can make, and how to shift your mindset from thinking about bedtime as a chore, as a task that you need to complete, or something boring that you're trying to avoid, and instead thinking about it as a foundational pillar of your routine that actually can turn your whole life around. Okay, so let's get right into it. Hi, I'm Anne, the sleep nerd, and I'm a sleep coach with ADHD. I have experienced this firsthand, and I've also seen this with a lot of my clients. So what I want you to really understand is what bedtime procrastination actually is and why we do it before we talk about anything else. So what it is, it's quite simple. If you think about procrastination in general, it's putting off a really important task and instead doing something else. And it's the same with bedtime procrastination. Essentially, you're putting off going to bed and going to sleep and doing other activities instead, and therefore delaying your sleep. So that could be scrolling on your phone, watching something, reading something, starting some random task that you just came up with, rearranging all your furniture in your house. It could be literally anything to basically avoid going to bed and going to sleep. And why we do it is quite interesting, because whether you're neurodivergent or not, everyone procrastinates. But people with ADHD will face this challenge more often, more regularly, and it's a lot harder to manage. So what I mean by that is our brains are understimulated by default. So they have less stimulation than a neurotypical brain. And that means that we are going to struggle with focus, motivation, starting tasks, finishing tasks, etc. So at night, our brains are more active, especially in the evenings and coming to bedtime, because all of a sudden there is less stimulation from the outside. Things are getting quieter, it gets darker, the lights are dimmed, but now our brains start to become active. So this is, of course, a problem, right? Our mind is racing and we have all these crazy ideas and things that we didn't complete. And, we remember all these things we were supposed to do. And then there isn't enough time to complete these tasks. Again, we delay our bedtime to try and cram everything in. Or we also sometimes just need time for ourselves because our days are very busy. We're constantly trying to do things, trying to complete things. And we're just exhausted at this point, but our brain is not really in the right stage to get to sleep because we haven't given ourselves enough time to relax. We pick up our phone and we think that is the way to kind of relax ourselves because we're distracting our brain from all of this information that we've been ingesting all day. We're essentially trying to avoid understimulation at all times, including at bedtime. But then that brings up an issue because it's counterproductive to sleep. In order to sleep, our brain needs to kind of shut down. We need to relax our brain in order to fall asleep. The other thing is, and it goes along with the understimulation, is that oftentimes we think of sleep as something very boring. And personally, of course, I am really interested in sleep, so this is not really a problem for me. And I've always enjoyed sleep. I like going to bed, lying down, being cozy and falling asleep. And it's something that I've never really seen as boring. But I do see the logic in that because I myself struggle to fall asleep sometimes. And then I'm just lying there and I do feel a bit bored, I guess, in a way. So I understand this concept of sleep is boring, so I'm going to avoid it until I basically pass out because my body is just too tired at this point. And that's just not a great strategy. And then the last thing I want to mention here is we're also avoiding a lot of uncomfortable thoughts and uncomfortable emotions, and that's why we procrastinate as well. And that is in general the reason often why we procrastinate, whether we're neurodivergent or not. We're often avoiding discomfort, having to deal with that task, having to go through some sort of discomfort. So we're trying to distract ourselves from that as much as we can. Okay, so now that we know what bedtime procrastination is, I want to talk a little bit about why this is a problem. Because again, you might say, well, this is just how I am and it works for me. You know, I just scroll on my phone until I pass out and that's it. That's just how I operate. But I want you to think about why this is an issue. One of the issues is it obviously makes us stay up later than we actually should. And we all know this, right? We think, okay, we're just going to scroll on our phones for a little bit or watch something and then we'll go to sleep. But one video turns into 10, or, you know, you're reading a really interesting book, you think, oh, just one more chapter. So you're then in this kind of spiral of hyper focusing and not being able to get away from that. And when you put the phone down, you actually still can't sleep because your brain is kind of still going and is still too stimulated at this point. You're essentially tipping the scale where you were understimulated and now you've overstimulated yourself and therefore you cannot go to sleep. So it doesn't actually help you in any way. You can use techniques to kind of stimulate your brain a little bit, but not too much. And I do have another video where I talk about this in terms of why the typical sleep tips don't work and what you can do instead. And I talk about how you basically have to find that balance. But bedtime procrastination is not one of those strategies. You do have to take a slightly different approach. More stimulation at night means that you will have a less restful sleep. The sleep quality will be diminished because, again, it takes you longer to actually relax your body, your brain, your heart rate. Everything takes longer and therefore your recovery is just not as good. So the quality and quantity of your sleep is affected. And of course, that makes it difficult to get up in the morning because it throws off your entire schedule. You're essentially going to end up spending the day sleep deprived. And again, you then get into this cycle of kind of waking up at night again and being wide awake and sort of wired, and then the cycle just continues. It really doesn't help you. It just creates this really irregular sleep schedule. And if you're not careful, it can become worse and worse, where you just go to bed later and later, and it's going to be really hard to come out of it. And I want you to understand why sleep as a whole is such an important pillar of managing your ADHD, actually. This is very often overlooked because not only is getting quality sleep foundational for our health in general, but especially when you have ADHD, because all the challenges that you have with ADHD are essentially amplified when you haven't slept well. If you think about it, when you have a bad night of sleep, everything just becomes 10 times harder than it already is. Think about, how difficult it is to pay attention and focus on a task already. When you haven't slept well, that's just amplified. So you're going to end up with a lot of brain fog and having to work even harder through all of these tasks. You're going to be more impulsive. Your emotions will be a lot harder to manage. You'll have more cravings for unhealthy, like fatty, salty foods, and that's already a problem, again, with ADHD, where you are going to be more impulsive. You're going to crave these foods even more because they give you dopamine. So then you try and kind of compensate. You drink a lot of caffeine, you eat a lot of sugar, and again, you'll get into this vicious cycle, right? On the other hand, if you sleep well consistently and have really high quality sleep, you will end up with more focus, more energy, improved memory, improved mood, better problem solving skills, more creativity even, and better physical recovery, because every single stage of your sleep affects one of these areas. And on top of that, if you are on any medication, on stimulants, whatever medication you are, good sleep will mean that your medication is going to be more effective. And I can definitely attest to that. When I haven't slept well, then I know that my medication is still going to kind of work, but there's a huge difference between a good and a bad night's sleep. Well, at this point you might say, well, actually I can get by with 5-6 hours of sleep and I do fine, but when I sleep for 8 hours, I feel absolutely awful. And this is a big misconception, and I've heard this a lot from people with ADHD, that they feel like they're doing better when they're sleeping less. But this is a misconception, because what happens is actually your body is kind of going into a stress response at this point. You're running on a lot of adrenaline, cortisol, and that's not necessarily bad. Those are all important functions in your body to cope with stressful events. But when you're doing this constantly and you're in a constant state of stress, then that's going to burn you out in the long run. So you might be okay for a few days and you're really productive, and then you're going to crash horribly. And when you finally then get some sleep, because your body is craving that extra sleep, then you'll feel really groggy and exhausted the next day, because your body is now going into a recovery mode. It's trying to come back to a normal state. So you're going to feel pretty bad after a good night of sleep, because previously your sleep has been so bad. So I want you to think about that, and I want you to understand that if you sleep well consistently over a longer period of time, then that doesn't actually happen, and it's the opposite. You will feel much, much better overall. You will be more creative, more focused, more energized, more productive, and all of the strengths that you have as a person with ADHD will actually come out more and will be amplified. On the other hand, a lot of people with ADHD say that they are just more productive at night and they get their best ideas in the middle of the night. Now, that might be true, but the problem is you won't be able to act on all these great ideas and actually execute them if you don't get enough sleep. This is because REM sleep, which typically happens in the second half of your sleep and in the early morning hours, that's the stage when you have your most, vivid dreams. And that's when your brain actually makes connections that you wouldn't be able to make while you're awake, because they're being made in your subconscious. So your brain is taking a lot of memories from your long-term memory and connecting them with new information, new knowledge that you've acquired in a way that you could not think of with your conscious mind. That means neglecting your sleep, and especially cutting your sleep short in the morning and not giving yourself enough REM sleep can actually make you less creative. That doesn't mean you have to force yourself into a neurotypical schedule. It just means that you need to get enough quality sleep for your personal needs. And that can be different for each individual. And oftentimes people with ADHD tend to be a later chronotype, meaning that they prefer to go to bed later and also wake up later. But if you're going to bed late and then waking up early, then you have a problem, right? You do need to find a schedule that works for you, but give yourself enough time to actually get the quality sleep that you need. And now that we understand what bedtime procrastination is, why we do it, and why it's bad for us, let's talk about what you can do about it. And this is going to take time. It's not just, a quick hack, a quick fix that you can implement tomorrow and then you stop bedtime procrastinating. It's something that you'll have to work on and improve on over time. But the first step that you can take is just simply being aware of what you're doing and the fact that you are doing it, because it is very common, and you want to accept the fact that it is common and that you're struggling with it, and not to beat yourself up about it is really important. Not to think about, oh my God, what am I doing? I need to stop doing this now, because that's only going to make it harder. You now understand why sleep is so important for ADHD. You are not able to stop seeing it as just a nice to have or something that you do once you pass out in the middle of the night, but you can make it a priority in your life. And you know that everything will be easier once you do that. So having this mindset shift is the first step, and having the awareness, and to not go overboard on this now. So now that you have this information, don't try and create perfect bedtime routine and remove all your phones, devices, and everything from the bedroom. You need to do it step by step. ADHD brains tend to have an all or nothing approach. So you go and jump right into it. You kind of hyper focus on this area and then you stop doing it. And this is not what we want. We want to create consistency. What you really need to do is actually make your evenings enjoyable. You need to make sleep something that you look forward to. So not something that you force yourself to do. So do whatever you enjoy doing in the evening. Understand that you can't neglect your needs until you get into bed, right? You have to make some time for yourself before you actually get to bedtime. And you need to create a very clear transition between your daytime activities and your bedtime, and essentially make your bed and your bedroom this very cozy, relaxing environment that you want to get into. As I said, I personally love sleep, and I might be weird, but if you can see sleep as something enjoyable rather than a chore or something that's boring, then you'll be on the right track. I really recommend watching this next video, because this is where I break down why the typical sleep advice that we get just does not work for people with ADHD. And I actually give you some actionable strategies that have helped me and my clients finally get into a healthy, sustainable, consistent sleep routine. So if you're interested in that, watch that video next. But thank you so much for watching, and sleep well.